Hello, I am Ryder Richards. Welcome to Let's Think About It. Do you have a mini tyrant in your life and you can't figure out how this person maintains power through idiocy? Yeah, well, I think we all do. But here's a recap of a conversation started between my wife and I. And I'm going to be leaning on Antonio Gramsci's thoughts on the dangers of common sense to explain the irrational behavior of people. Part 1. As usual, I was discussing my previous podcast, Guilt, Shame, and Groupthink, in this kind of sporadic, half-hearted fashion with my wife as we were just talking about all sorts of junk. And then I brought up the American South and I related it to the banality of evil as formed through social norms of groupthink. Oh, excuse me, can you pass the cream? Thank you. Yeah. Developed through guilt and shame, but these groups, and the sugar. Thanks, that's great. Sort of alleviate guilt and shame with contradictory dogmas. Yeah, that's good coffee. So people really never have to look at themselves fully, and it leads to programming yourself to avoid pain by following social norms that... Wait, is that a head in our freezer? Yeah, that formulates a politics of pain sharing rather than generating healthy humans. And no, wait, seriously, why is there a head in our freezer? And the point she brought up was, of course, that there's people in power already behaving badly, with a proven track record of hurting people, trying to silence dissent, and formulating cronyism around themselves. And unfortunately, treating this person with love and compassion or removing guilt and shame probably won't work. And truthfully, playing into their fantasy could help you as an individual survive, according to Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, but cozying up to this person would be like trying to steer a ship in a storm with a chainsaw. You know, Enlightened One, I just want to give you a big hug for not listening to any of your advisors or employees. Yes. They need a firm hand to guide them. As a matter of fact, your support shows me my instincts are always correct. What do you think about helicopters and yachts? Ooh, and tighter pants. Or, of course, you can go on the offensive when confronting this person. Hey, Prez, you idiot monster. You killed my friend with your arrogance. And door slams, right? And that's it. Now, a third and better tactic may be to forego the personal insults for neutral questions to at least attempt a civilized discourse. Can you tell me what factors drove your decision surrounding COVID? But this will put them on the defensive because leadership is always in cover your ass mode, and they never give straight answers, especially to really problematic questions. Instead, they prefer ambiguous abstractions that can be assigned alternate values in case the story needs to change. So everything is contingent all the time, and this leads us to very abstract language. Oh, by the way, this isn't even Trump we're talking about. It's people we know who have seen Trump's blustering behavior as a perfect model for arrogant dismissiveness or cronyism. It also refers to people who refuse to say, I was wrong or mistaken. Hence, there becomes a doubling down effect that amplifies the tragedy and bad decisions. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls. Carl Jung, of course. So, in the previous episode, I promoted this kind of guilt-free, shame-free dynamic to break down barriers and keep people empathetic rather than participating in defensiveness. And this kind of insecurity-driven social hierarchies. Of course, hierarchies are gonna exist, and so will tribes with prejudice and preference, because we're all human. But the idea is to have a strong, thoughtful people practicing virtues of empathy and reflective wisdom, having open, respectful discourse, while still remaining critical of institutions. So whenever groupthink behaviors lead individuals into dogma, we need to have the ability to reflect, process, and halt the shaming tendency before we corner people or they corner themselves, right? This leads to really negative actions. This prompts a kind of join us or die survival mode, where, as we all know, once you get into survival mode, rationality goes out the window. Nevertheless, chatting with my wife, I paused from, of course, staring at this head in the freezer, and we teased out a few more points. This person, a troubled and troublesome mini-tyrant, I mean, they're not a full tyrant, right, who is above the law, but they're simply a leader with repressive practices. This person is typically some sort of high-level manager, leader, president, CEO, something like this, who is hefted into their role by supporters or a base. Typically, they're authoritarian. They're not very deft at maneuvering or persuading or lying, or they wouldn't be seen quite so clearly as a tyrant. So they tend to resort to really blunt tactics like coercion and fear. And whenever you call them out, I mean, normally social pressure would ameliorate behavior for most people, but we also have to consider a couple things here. Psychologically, this person in power is either so insecure and out of their league that they convert themselves into a micromanaging dictator. I mean, all the way down into demanding blanket acceptance with no dissent. And or B, they're getting their rewards and support from somewhere else. Otherwise, they wouldn't continue this behavior, right? And we know from Ainsley's breakdown of Will a couple episodes ago that people don't do anything without a reward. And reward doesn't mean pleasure. Let's not confuse those two. Reward means getting your itch scratched. And if that's acting out in a righteous way, oh shucks, bless her heart, I just had to show her the error of her ways. Or maybe it's humbly carrying your cross for all to see. Or maybe it's gaining Roger from the country club's back-thumping support. Or perhaps it's even darker. Maybe it's more like the troubling scene at the end of Mystic River, where Sean Penn's character is told by Laura Linney's character that he has a big heart. He protects his girls, that he's a king. He will do what he has to for those he loves, for those he needs to protect. Everyone is weak, everyone but us. And you could rule this town.
You could rule this town.
And there we have it. The strong man is really just a man manipulated behind the scenes by his wife, by his love, into oppressive behavior. As Jordan Peterson says, and if you think tough men are dangerous, wait until you see what weak men are capable of. Part 2. Common Sense and Cultural Hegemony. So mapping out all of this is, of course, multifaceted. I mean, we're going from personal internal psychology and rewards to this more socially or culturally permissible behaviors. But I'm most interested in the notion that we have a cultural split, wherein the typical function of social guilt or shaming has somehow been subverted into rewards from your own group. So your bad behavior, your oppression, and your strong-arm tactics, these aren't seen as bad, and it's actually implicitly encouraged. One notion from psychology is, of course, that we align with ideas and groups to reduce stress or cognitive dissonance. So if everyone is wearing pants, perhaps we should wear pants too. But equally, we revert to familiar behavior patterns, not because they're healthy, but because it's actually comfortable to know your role and to understand the rules. I mean, consider your spouse at Christmas with their parents. Their behavior reverts, as does the parents. Now, when we were raised, we assume the framework of our parents and society. And this often leads to massive blind spots and really cruddy behaviors. Ricky Bobby, shame, demean. Go sit in the corner. You gotta stand up for what's right. So go punch your sister for taking your dessert. But Pa, I gave her my... Don't you talk back to me. You speak when you're spoken to. Respect your elders. Cleanliness is next to godliness, and idle hands are the devil's workshop. Amen. Now, nobody talk to Bobby till he mans up and punches a girl. If you ain't first, you're last, Ricky Bobby. Team America. Yeah. So when these blind spots lead us and the whole society to irrational behavior that upholds a status quo or some sort of politics of pain, well, it maintains certain ideas and certain privileges that help certain people. And this is known as cultural hegemony. Antonio Gramsci, he discusses how the status quo is maintained and, well, historically it was kept through violence, coercion, or economics, but Gramsci says it's now accomplished through culture. And more specifically, the bourgeoisie, or the ruling capitalist class, have worked to create a culture in which your blind spots keep you on the treadmill, of course, facing away from the curtain and the wizard. So how does this work? The working class comes to associate the values and benefits of the rich with their own benefit. So you bind people to you, where if you do well, your cadre of supporters sees their fate tied to yours, your rise is their rise, and it also reaffirms in their head that they too, as loyalists, could rise one day. So this is a fealty structure of common sense beliefs, and those promoted in the culture are the shapers. These are the thinkers, the educators, and the lawmakers who are, of course, promoted because their beliefs align with the cultural norms, right? Otherwise, of course, you would have been a discredited dissident. You're never going to have a Supreme Court judge who doesn't believe in the power of the law. Now, as Stephen West covers in his Philosophize This talk on Gramsci, Gramsci was a neo-Marxist. He wasn't really as interested, though, in the material part of historic materialism, like Marx and some of the others who kept going on and on about the means of production, but he was more interested in the historic and cultural part that prevented real change from occurring. So you can talk cogs and shared wealth all day long, but if the workers don't want to rebel, if they actually protect and love the chains that they're in because they're actually familiar and comfortable chains, Your rallying speech is going to go something like this. I've looked at the numbers, and with this year's profits tripling, we could all have a better life, and the company owners would still make a vast fortune. If we could all just stand together, we could all have healthcare and a better life. I ain't no traitor. What kind of dog bites the hand that feeds him? My granddad fought against the socialists. We pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps around here, sonny. I don't need no handout. I never trust a man with soft hands and tan feet. A banjo in the hand is worth two in the bush. Dave, go back to your corner until you can learn to chime in properly. So the accepted tribal language invokes common sense phrases, basically just euphemisms that have become foundational dogmas that you're not allowed to disagree with, lest of course you lose your place in the tribe. One great insight of Gramsci is that to push back against cultural hegemony of the bourgeoisie, you would want a superstructure of sympathetic art, law, and philosophy on top. These would be the shapers, and they would work to support the maintainers or the base. And this, of course, they in turn would work to maintain those shapers, and this would modify itself over time, and there's this continual loop that ends up happening. But if the educators and lawmakers arise because they have the perfect blind spots, and this will never allow them to think rebellious thoughts, but it only further empowers the status quo, so this loop is recycling the same ideas over and over without actually modifying itself, and it's not incorporating any new ideas. Now, interestingly, today, most educators are left-leaning and sympathetic to socialist practices to help the less fortunate, and they're very critical of capitalism. But now many who would benefit from the universal health care or wealth taxation are actually adamantly opposed to it, even though it seems logical they wouldn't be. And so we have this schism showing many of the cracks of values in our system. And this scares the crap out of people who thrive on stability to make their living. However, it should be noted that during the pandemic and financial crisis, billionaires tended to dramatically increase their wealth. So they actually thrived on instability. So yeah, I mean, of course, dear capitalists, we want to reward you for your hard work and creativity, but geez, I mean, we're definitely not all in this together. So what happens if you speak out against this system of common sense to show people the blind spots? Well, they don't thank you for it. I know we say we want smart, thinking people, but we really don't. When you speak up, you're declared whiny, or maybe a whiny little bitch, or God forbid, you're called large female genitalia. And by showing a preference for logic or clear-sightedness, you actually threaten stability. Now, this is both the internal narrative you threaten and the economic livelihood. And you become either a victim or a target here. Eventually, to protect yourself, you either practice your freedoms and you walk away, you use your feet and you leave, or you submit, which paradoxically is actually seen as growing a pair, and you end up accepting that pain is truly just weakness leaving the body, or as Kevin Bacon may say,
"Thank you, sir, may I have another?"
And voila, we all of a sudden have a cohesive group who actively work against their own best self-interests. Thank God for common sense. Back to our mini-tyrant. What really drives this cruelty forward when it seems obvious and proven that other solutions get better results? Why continue with fear and repression? I mean, if you could save everyone and still make the same amount of money and be revered as a saint, well, I mean, that's way too easy. I want to be a saint with arrows poking out of me. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the Matrix where people need the pain or they don't believe the simulation. Well, surprise everyone, there's already enough pain, you don't have to manufacture more. Well, okay, one facet is this common sense of the conservative variety. It tends to reward tough choices. So hardship and pain are actually respected, forming a backbone of groupthink morality. We secretly don't believe the work smarter, not harder line, because that looks like it actually champions laziness. And as we all know from any group project in school, there's still someone who does all the work and the lazy smart kid ends up taking all the credit without lifting a finger. In reality, work harder, not smarter, proves your loyalty. And those who join you in the pain, these aren't the smart people, but these are your true friends. And it gets kind of Fight Club here, right? Well, take the punch, let the acid eat your skin. His name is Robert Paulson. Okay, so I had a whole section here, but let's trim it down real quick. A leader will lean on loyalty because they're scared, and they will remind you of your role in the hierarchy to make it seem inevitable that your place is to follow. And this ties your survival to theirs. And this is economic coercion. They will make tough choices with a world-weary performative facade. To make an omelet, you must break a few eggs. Yet they conveniently forget other truisms. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. As they cherry-pick language that confirms that this is indeed the way the world works, it is to imply that injustice is a natural law. It's like gravity or a hurricane, and you can't be mad at nature, so you can't be mad at me. And from their camp, the pain of a hard truth, it has larger stakes than the people hurt. And to bear this burden is noble and it's heartbreaking, which is why I make the big bucks. This reminds me of one of the things Seneca says. All cruelty springs from weakness. Part 3. So we are pretty sure that our abusive tyrant is completely authentic. There's no polis oikos split of the public-private family role, right? His public and private selves have bled together, leaving a singular, lamentable fool, unable to separate criticism of work from criticism of himself. And really, that's quite unhealthy in a leadership role. Of course, to unseat this mini-tyrant, after civil discourse and personal and media shaming have all failed, we turn to the legislative branch or judicial branch of society. And of course, the required bloated fees for justice that best serve those already in power. I'll sue you!
Bring it. I'll spend tax dollars to fight every employee complaint.
Geez, you suck.
Your mom sucks and my attorneys are bigger than yours.
You're a child.
I'm rubber, you're glue.
So let's just consider this a failure, right? At any stage when it reaches this level, there is a failure. Though increasingly it seems to be the only way to get people's attention is to sue them. Because of course, we're in this competitive meritocracy where you must push legal limits at all points. You must exist in the gray zones. And if you don't, you just don't want it bad enough. We only respect the legal limit now, not the moral limit. So, in this world of power and repression, of hierarchies and capitalism, of diluted common sense and tribal fealty over rationality, well, we can stand up to the big bad wolf. We can fight the ideological struggle. We can fight on principle. And what we end up doing is fracturing our own polis oikos compartmentalization, as we can't help but bring home our pain and frustration at the end of the day. Now, knowing we're right, or in the right, that's a nice balm. That's an aggrievement ointment. But the bruises are still spreading. We're still getting pummeled. So being right, it hurts so much more than just giving in. And what does it say that the only way to maintain personal sanity is to exercise your choice and your freedom, to leave the country, to leave your job, to leave friendships, to leave love? Because the society or workplace has internalized and co-opted this dark morality as a common sense. And this becomes a thriving strategy for them. And doesn't leaving feel like giving up the good fight? Or we can, once again, convince ourselves to simply care less. We can fracture our psyche into public-private. What I do half my waking life is not who I actually am. And we can hope that through small enough movements in the right direction over time, those shapers in the superstructure will actually do their job, and the light will shine again. Or then again, perhaps that head in my freezer is the only solution. We should totally ask the French about that. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Next episode is a super short one on being addicted to thinking and how it has a similar effect as common sense on blinding us to reality. However, if you're curious about another way to look at the rise of authority through social pressure, look at Genet's The Balcony. I referenced it in my earlier podcast. I think it's step 3, doubling. And of course, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the content, please find a way to like, subscribe, share this with your friends, or even contribute. All the best.